It's a busy week around the InGoal Radio podcast studio and InGoal magazine. We have webinars and we have podcasts, and it's almost going on a daily basis the way that we're cranking out content. Darren Millard, along with the co-founders of InGoal magazine, David Hutchison and Kevin Woodley, fresh off our webinar with Cory Price, and want to talk about what's coming up later on this weekend. Plus, talk about our feature interview today, which will include a conversation with Devan McConnell, who is the Director of Performance Science and Reconditioning with the New Jersey Devils. It's a long title. It's an extensive interview, and it is jam-packed full of all kinds of golden nuggets, as we'll tee them up in just a little bit. One involving using more than 2 goaltenders in practice and the benefit to that. Yes, there is a benefit, and we all know everybody wants as many shots as possible, but just a little bit of a tidbit there. Hutch and Woody, congratulations. The webinar with Cory Price and Eli Wilson Goaltending Clinics, was a massive success. And what did you guys, Hutch, start with you, take away from the conversation with Cory on last weekend?
Well, I'm super glad we had you in the driver's seat, Darren. So thank you for the professionalism that you added to all that. I'm not sure where Woody and I would have been if we had to handle that ourselves. It was a fantastic experience. What I really enjoyed about it was that even though we knew there was an audience of 500 or so people watching, we did get to see a bit of the Cory that we see in the summer. That relaxed, comfortable, happy to be around young people guy that was just sharing who he really is. And I think some of that guard was taken down that you often see when most of us really only get to see him in those sort of post-game media scrums. And I don't know how much of that was on air during the webinar and how much of that was beforehand when he was very chill with all of us. But just great to be able to share that with everybody, because even though we weren't in a room together, I think everybody did get the experience of being with Cory to some extent. And it was great to see on social. Thank you to everybody who shared some photos with us through Instagram, Twitter, wherever, of their young goaltenders online with Cory. What a cool opportunity for all these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me that was the best part, was that feedback we got afterwards, and I thought it was summed up perfectly when those parents sent us those pictures of their 12, 13, 14-year-old son or daughter, their young goaltender in their life, sitting at a table looking at a computer screen, and Cory Price is looking back at them having a conversation. And there was, and I wish I had the Instagram post in front of me. There was a mom that sent us a note basically saying that, like, he's gonna have to snap back to reality here because he thinks he's just hanging out with his buddy Cory and having a conversation, and that this is normal. And so to be able to do that for these kids, got a lot of feedback from parents on emails afterwards, talking about the exact same thing that Hutch just mentioned, about how much they felt they got to see of who Cory was compared to the post game, Q&A sessions with the media. Like, they just felt like they got to see the real Cory Price, and like Hutch said, that's what we get to see every year at the Eli Wilson thing, especially around kids. He's so good, so gracious with his time. I wish we'd sort of rolled out a little longer Q&A and a little less of the video, just because the Q&A was so good with you running it, Darren. So maybe for next time. But yeah, just thanks to him, thanks to Eli Wilson, and thanks to all the people that signed up. I mean, we got to the max 500 pretty quick. And maybe next time we even expand it beyond that. The next time we get a name like that, although there aren't many names like that. So yeah, just I was excited, and to see that excitement come back on social media afterwards and in the messages from parents, it was pretty cool to see this community growing.
And there was a tactical, strategic element to it as well, as far as Eli and Cory approached drills, working together in game situations. One of them was behind the net coverage, where Cory creates this window for himself so he can look behind the net. That was a great bit of terminology. The other one was how Cory reacts to, like, the reality is you're going to allow goals, and how he responds to that in his post-goal situation. And the guy likes fishing. He likes fishing a lot.
You think, eh?
I think you got a real glimpse of why Eli and Cory enjoy working together, because they are that very similar soft spoken, just get to the point, very relaxed personalities. Eli's coaching on the ice when he's working with his top level, well, all goaltenders is, it fits the way Carey was describing some of the things that he was doing because it's very short, very to the point. Here's what you need to do. Let's get to work. And Carey's kind of the same. Just tell me what you want me to do, and he does it. And I know Eli's told us before that when they are working on the ice, um, there really isn't a whole ton of back and forth between the two of them. Carey's just, what do you want me to do? All right, I got it, and he does it. So his approach to working is sort of no nonsense, but also keep it simple. And Eli is all about keeping it simple as well. And it's fun to watch Carey in that too, because I remember one of the years Eli was trying to teach a method of getting up out of the reverse and getting onto your feet to take a shot, sort of top a crease. And Carey's got one way of doing it, and Eli's got a slightly different way of doing it. And Carey said, "Oh, so is this what you want me to do?" And then, of course, executes it flawlessly, having never done it that way in his life. And Eli just started laughing. Yeah, Carey, that's exactly what I want you to do. It's a lot of fun to watch the two of them work together, and I think maybe you got a bit of a feel for that.
And of course, that was one of the takeaways when we did get into some of the video, just watching Carey, talk about Darren behind the net plays and the drills he was doing with Eli and how they translated into games, and a couple nice clips of sort of behind the net pass outs and shots, and just how much more Carey recovers to his feet now off that, coming off his posts on the low play and then just getting out on, especially if the puck moves up, anywhere past sort of the top of the circles. And he Carey mentioned that, right? Like that's something we've actually been working on. And I didn't recognize it as something that had changed in his game, just something I noticed in the clips. And sure enough, he said that has been a big part of part of his evolution. So it was cool to get a little window into that. But I still think for the most part, like as much as the takeaways on the technical side, I still think for a lot, especially the young kids, just to get to see him in that element that we see him in every year at the Eli Wilson Day with Price, is pretty special. And to be able to do it for that many people made it even more special. So yeah, a good weekend all around.
Just paraphrasing, but he talked about the strategy behind the net and then the pass out front and how he handles that from just a technical standpoint and tactically to approach the shooter. And then he drops in, and then from then on, it's, to paraphrase, desperation. And I thought, well, isn't that great that he's not trying to tell everybody that he's got all the answers. It's, I've got my plan, I've got my way I handle it, I go into it, and then when things go outside that realm, you kind of just you rely on your instincts and your physical abilities. I thought that was neat as well.
The other one was we are not going to be selling any juggling books, juggling drills, or mental game drills based on the advice of Carey. And I just think that goes to show you, like, he is so cut out for this position, mindset wise, and
to play in Montreal.
That market. Absolutely. You got to see that. And that doesn't mean, and he'll be the first one to say, it doesn't mean that's for every goaltender. There are some that, want to be working on the hand and the eye and doing all those drills. Not everybody can just step on the ice and have the confidence that Carey brings with him. Some people need to do different things to warm up, and some people need to do different mental preparation. But it was interesting to hear him talk about like how he just does not let himself get overwhelmed or cluttered mentally by worrying about too much of those things. He just has such faith in himself that when he goes out there, all he needs to do is be able to see that puck, and that's all he needs in warm up. Is I just need real shots, right? That's pretty much what he said, and
right,
I'm good to go.
So if you missed it and you're listening right now and you're saying, boy, that sounds like a lot of information and some great information and cool stuff between Eli Wilson and Carey Price, the good news is you can still get an opportunity to take in that webinar, albeit not live. How do they do that, Woody? And let's drive them to the website.
InGoalMag.com, InGoal Premium membership will get you full access to that. Obviously, we've been running it now since December. What are we at, Hutch? Like, got to be closing in on 120 articles up there in the 5 months
I think
that we've been running.
You're probably in the right neighborhood. Huge variety, obviously, 20 some odd pro reads, 15 to 17 drills, and similar number of tips. You get access to the feature interviews from this podcast without having to listen to the three of us. There's all sorts of great advantages to being an InGoal Premium member. But seriously, if you do want to check out that webinar and you go there, another little benefit is the video sharing was a bit of a struggle, let's be honest, on the weekend. So even if you were with us already for that webinar, you might want to go back because we have a much smoother version of all the video that Cory was going over. And guaranteed you're going to learn something if you go watch it again anyway.
Yeah, and credit to Hutch there for doing the work rather than just reposting the Zoom video, and which, as he said, there were some issues with the video that Cory and everyone was watching was a little bit choppy. Hutch spent the time to transfer in the video that I had from the source video as the guy doing the screen sharing, and it's much smoother, so much easier on the eyes, and you can probably sort of follow along a little better. So I'd even if you're, as Hutch said, even if you were on the call, I'd recommend going back and checking that out. And of course, InGoal Premium, it's $50 for the year Canadian, which is like 2 nickels in the States. Pretty much less than $1 a week, less than the cost of a skate sharpening. $6 a month if you want to go monthly. Obviously, this is a little shill on my part, but I'd highly recommend it. And so would a lot of professional goaltenders. We got a nice note today. Brandon Maxwell, who is playing over, I shouldn't do this on the spot. I probably should have asked if I could do this, but we got a nice note from him. He's playing over in the Austrian League, or he was playing over in the Austrian League this year. Just basically saying it's, to paraphrase, a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't you subscribe? He's one of our newest pro goaltender subscribers. And, that brings the list. I think we have counting on the air is always a really good idea. But a quick scan, we've got 15 or 16 NHL goalie coaches, another 11 in the American Hockey League, dozens in the NCAA CHL, Europe, another dozen in Europe. And then, with Brandon hopping on board in terms of professional goalies, I'm just quick counting. This is really good counting on the air. We're
just impressed you can count, Woody.
We're actually over 30 professional goaltenders now subscribed to InGoal Premium. So to me, that says a lot about the type of content that's on there. And that's not a back pat on our part. It's because we have so many coaches and goaltenders that have been so willing to share drills and ideas and tips with us so that we can bring that to our audience, whether it's kids or other professional goaltenders. They're clearly finding value in it. And the Cory Price webinar is just one more cherry on top. And we've got more webinars coming up.
Right. Hutch will have 2 those professional goaltending coaches coming up this weekend in a webinar. Paul Schoenfelder, Andy Chiodo on Saturday. Do you want to just take us through what's going to happen on Saturday?
Absolutely. Kevin was just saying that Brandon's playing in the Austrian League, and I believe it was when Andy Chiodo was playing in Austria that I first met him at an Eli Wilson camp. So it's all coming full circle here. Eli's so soft-spoken that I asked him what he was doing one morning, and he just said, I got a private this morning. And I happened to be at the rink, so I said, well, I'll come out and take a few photos, and skated onto the ice, and there's a private lesson between Eli with Andy Chiodo in net and some friend of his named Jason Spezza shooting. So a lot of fun to get out for that. And afterwards, Andy and I struck up a bit of a conversation and have been friends ever since. And he is truly one of the most knowledgeable coaches that I've ever been on the ice with. He's got a unique and very technical approach to the position, and yet very holistic at the same time. And he's worked with some guys like Jordan Binnington. He was starting to work with when we first met Andy and when we first went out on the ice with the 2 of them, and has obviously played a big role in Jordan's rise. And Malcolm Subban, another goaltender he spends quite a bit of time with, and quite a few others. So we really enjoy our time with him. And then he's a good friend with Paul Schoenfelder in Carolina, Woody.
Yeah, and Paul's a guy that I got to know working just as a kind of a video scrub at the Hockey Canada POE camp. Paul was one of the coaches there. What was that, 2 or 3 summers ago? First time I met him, I knew him through Elias Rassi in Ottawa. Guy who'd done some work for us. One of my favorites as a young coach. Had done some writing for us at InGoal over the years, and so I knew of Paul through Eli, and when I got to meet him, just a great guy. He's now working for the Carolina Hurricanes as their goalie development coach. He's won gold medals with Hockey Canada at under 17 and under 18. Of course, he is the defending still 2019 American Hockey League Calder Cup champion Charlotte Checkers. He was the goalie coach there, working with Alex Nedeljkovic. I hope I said that right, because I screw
think
names
you
up.
did.
Like
Well done.
nailed it.
Yeah.
I should have just kept going like confidently.
So we have two pro goaltending coaches this weekend, brought to us by two completely different Eli goaltending coaches. And part of the vision that we had for this was that the two of them might get the opportunity to engage in a little bit of professional discussion around topics that they're interested in, so that we can be flies on the wall while they have that professional chat. But then we will open it up for a Q&A session for all of our viewers as well.
Look forward to it. To Andy Chiodo, the goaltending development coach for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and Paul Schoenfelder, goaltender development coach for the Carolina Hurricanes, joining us on the webinar on Saturday. What time is that, if people want to sign up and take it in live?
Saturday is at noon Pacific, and that's 3:00 Eastern. And if you're an InGoal member currently, you should have received an email from us on Tuesday with a link where you can go and sign up. And also, you could go to our website now, and there'll be a little post on there similar to when we had Cory, and you can register yourself there. It is a pre-register event. You can't just sort of drop in with a link. Encourage you to do that soon so you get familiar with the interface. And after you sign up, one thing we did notice with the Cory Day, folks, you should get an email pretty much right away from Zoom indicating that you have been accepted into the webinar. And if you don't, then you do need to get in touch with us just so that we can sort that out. Right, Kevin? Is that?
Yeah, no, and the other note is we had some people, not everyone, that didn't get in on the Cory Day, but we did have some people that got their pre-registration, and then at the time of the event actually went to our website, and we had put a note up once the pre-registration was full, saying the event was full, just so we didn't have people trying to get in after it had filled up, or maybe even subscribing to get in and it was full. The people that had pre-registered saw that as a sign they couldn't get in. And what you need to do is make sure you hold on to that email with the Zoom link in it, because that's what you click. Don't go to ingoalmag.com. It'll be on the Zoom link. So
Don't throw it out.
We have barely even mentioned this new webinar with Paul and Andy, and we're already up around 75 guests registered, pre-registered to attend. So yeah, they're in demand. It's popular. It's going to be a great time. We should be well over 100 people. Make sure you get pre-registered. Check out the links on ingoalmag.com.
Looking forward to it from a technical side, from a tactical and strategy side of playing goal. That will be a big part of the Paul and Andy webinar. Today's feature interview on InGoal Radio, the podcast, involves more of the preparation and the recovery, and in between, making sure that you're ready to put your skills on display in the best fashion possible. Devan McConnell is the Director of Performance Science and Reconditioning with the New Jersey Devils. It's an extended interview, but it's so fascinating, the stuff that Hutch and Devan get into. We'll go around the horn here just so people can kind of grab onto a couple of different things. But for me, it was using more than two goaltenders in practice does have a benefit. We all know sharing the net is difficult, but Hutch and Devan talk about 4 goaltenders in practice. You could get the most out of everything for both shooters and your number one goaltenders.
And absolutely, if you're a parent, if you're a goalie coach, if you're a head coach, you should listen to that part of the interview. Make sure you stick around. It's towards the end, because it isn't just, hey, practice isn't good for goaltenders. It is science behind why the way we run a lot of practices just frankly isn't good for your goaltenders, in particular your starting goaltenders.
Now, practice dummies, though. I want to mention that we're not referring to anybody in particular other than maybe poking fun of ourselves when we say 4 goaltenders out there and a couple of practice dummies.
To be fair to Devan, he didn't completely take the bait when I asked that question, because he did say, we do understand as goaltenders that there are other reasons for practice, there's other needs, and so on. I set him up when I said, in an absolutely perfect world where we couldn't care less about the shooters on the ice, even though we know we have to, what would you do? So it was good of him to expound on all that for us. For me, that is the
Uh,
piece that stuck, and the piece out of that stuck for me was not that it was okay to have 3 or 4 goaltenders on the ice, but that he wouldn't use them equally. And quite
mhm.
often we struggle when we see 3 or 4 on the ice because there's a rotation and it just feels like you're getting fewer reps than you should. But he would very intentionally have a goaltender there to take certain reps, and then he would, and we're not going to give that all away just now. You can hear it, but and then your starter and your backup would have a different role in practice. So that was fascinating to me. I think it's worth mentioning, guys, that the reason we bumped into Devan and got him onto the podcast is we get an email every time somebody subscribes, and sometimes you have time to see who it's coming from. And I happen to see that New Jersey Devils email address, and of course the ears perk up, and I did a little research and saw that exactly what Devan does. My background is sports science 1,000 years ago, so I was fascinated and reached out to him, and we had a little conversation going. Devan is a goaltender, and himself remains fascinated by the position, and that's why he subscribed. And so we had a fantastic conversation, and he jumped at the opportunity to come on the show with us. And actually, we've even talked about him providing a bit of content for our members as well. Because one thing that he did talk about in this podcast interview was the specific routine that his goaltenders go through before practice in the mornings. And
Yeah, very
and yeah,
cool.
very cool. And I'm glad that I asked him how long it took, because as he started to mention each of these things, I was picturing sort of spending 2 hours in the gym in the morning getting ready to go on the ice, and it's not that at all. It's a very involved routine, but it's 10 or 15 minutes. So looking forward to sharing that.
He also has a book out, A Practical Approach to Applied Sports Science for Athletic Development. We'll talk about that a little bit more after the interview. But right now, here's Devan McConnell, the Director of Performance Science and Reconditioning, a goaltender himself, works in the National Hockey League with all players, but offers his unique perspective on goaltending with David Hutchison, the feature interview on InGoal Radio, the podcast.
So here we are, Devan. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's our pleasure. Got to be a really interesting time for somebody in your role right now.
Interesting is one way to put it. Yeah,
Mhm,
it's
mhm.
a lot of moving parts and a lot of uncertainty, obviously. But yeah, it has been interesting.
So I assume you're in fairly regular communication with the players to keep them on top of their game as best they can physically?
Yep, yeah. So our whole staff, our whole performance and medical staff, basically, the way that we do it, we kind of divvy everybody up, and everybody's got a handful of the guys that we reach out to and touch base with, every few days, once a week, whatever. Um, Performance side of the equation, we have training programs for the guys, so we're checking in with them and going back and forth, making sure they have what they need and they know what's going on, or making any adjustments. And our medical guys, same thing on their end, just making sure everybody's healthy, and if they need anything, try to get it to them. And that's kind of how we operate.
How do you I mean, what are your guidelines even for putting a program together when you're not really sure what the next step is?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, one of the first hurdles is just that a lot of guys don't have. I mean, nobody has gym access anywhere.
Sure.
So, a few guys have home gyms. More established older guys might have a decent setup, but a lot of guys are in apartments somewhere, wherever that home might be, and they really don't have anything. So, the first hurdle was kind of getting them a minimal amount of training equipment to be able to use just in their home space, and then designing programs around that minimal amount of equipment, and then trying to balance sort of the equation of trying to keep guys as prepared as possible to come back and play if and when that happens, but also at least early on not knowing if that was going to happen, and so trying to think in terms of a little bit longer term kind of off season mindset. So a lot of spinning plates, trying to keep kind of in the air at the same time.
So really curious when you said making sure they have a minimal amount of equipment. We've probably got some families at home listening to this podcast thinking, okay, time to get on Amazon. What am I ordering? What do you need for a basic program at home?
Yeah, we set guys up with, or we ask them to just get like one 20 kilo kettlebell, a 20-pound weight vest, and a TRX strap.
Okay.
And there's, some other stuff. Guys would get some, rubber bands, mini bands, and things like that can do a little bit with, that are pretty easy to pick up. But those are the three big things that we kind of told guys, well, if you can at least get your hands on these, we can design a very kind of basic plan around that and allow you to be able to train at least somewhat adequately.
And how are you sharing the program with guys?
We have a software system that we use that basically we can write up team and or individual programs and prescriptions, and basically they have an app on their phone that they can just open it up, or they can get on the computer and open up the website, and every day they have access to the kind of from A to Z, the whole lineup of exercises and all the detail to it. Videos go along with it and all that stuff.
Oh, fabulous. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that software.
Yeah.
Be good fun. What's if we're not in a phase like this, what's a day in the life for you in the hockey world?
Yeah, it's there's sort of two scenarios, I guess, game day and practice day. Practice day is fairly routine as far as get to the rink, probably 7:30 in the morning. Generally an hour, 2 hours before whatever time the team is going to show up is kind of the plan. My role specifically, so as director of performance science, I oversee all of the sports science and technology tools and data that we use. So one of the first things just physically that I do when I get to the arena is I set up a lot of the equipment, whether that be, heart rate straps guys are going to wear at practice, or kind of some of the tracking equipment that needs to be physically fastened into their shoulder pads or whatever. And then if we're going to have a training session that day, whatever technology or tools we're going to actually use in the weight room. So again, those are kind of my piece of the puzzle, specifically my niche. So make sure that stuff's all set up, ready to go. And then it's just really, the day to day is depends on if we're going to train. We'll have guys that come in before practice. Some guys will come in after practice. So assisting and working with those guys. If we have any injured athletes, another part of my role is reconditioning. So I really work sort of hand in hand with the medical staff as far as getting injured players back. So that'll be quite variable day to day with those athletes, but it'll be working sort of one-on-one there. And then running a lot of our equipment that we would use in practice from a monitoring and tracking standpoint. Post practice, kind of the same stuff. Some guys will work out, setup or breakdown of equipment, and then kind of the end of the day is looking back at whatever information we've collected, analyzing that data, creating whatever reports might be necessary for coaching staff or general manager, or even just within our department to better understand where guys are kind of at. Game days are kind of similar in the mornings. It's kind of the same setup. Obviously, middle of the day, after pregame skate or meetings, most guys will go home, take a nap. The staff usually will kind of break up into two groups. Half the group will kind of do the same thing, take off, go home, see family, have lunch. And the other half will stay and usually play like a staff game, which I end up playing a lot.
Oh, nice. And you are a former goaltender, correct?
That's
Or I
right,
should say
exactly.
a current goaltender. Once a goalie, always a goalie.
I am back to current. Yeah, it was a while that I didn't play, but now I'm back to skating pretty regularly. And then back to the rink at like 4:00 for, before the guys show up and kind of getting stuff ready for the game.
Fantastic. So many threads I'd love to pull at there. I think we could be here for a long time. You talked about the tools that you're using and heart rates and tracking. Is that the Catapult system?
We use a different
Similar?
company, but similar idea. Yeah, basically, people could think of it as GPS tracking on the ice.
Wow. Okay, so what does that tell you about goaltenders?
That's
Because
a really
most of the
interesting
stuff
question.
most of the stuff I've heard in presentations and so on, and they really just talk about players. So
Yes.
what have you learned?
There's certainly more robust information on players at this point. The technology is not new in sports in general. It's been used in soccer and rugby and field-based sports for quite a while. It's fairly new in hockey. So there's actually a lot of sort of tinkering and figuring out what means what and what's important, and especially when it comes to goaltenders. Our system in particular gives us some information on left, right, change of direction, acceleration, deceleration. So we can start to get an idea of the type of or quantify the workload that goaltenders are going through from an in the crease movement standpoint, what that actually looks like from a loading standpoint. So we can the idea is to kind of work backwards from that. If we have sort of a model of and we can quantify what's physically happening on the ice for the players, then what do we have to do to move the needle from a training standpoint? Or what do we need to better understand from an injury preventative standpoint? What are the loads the athlete is going through? And then another way that we can look at that is we look at return to play a lot of times. So we can see what a player's baseline information is on a typical practice within whatever, there's going to be fluctuation, but kind of what's his normal. And then if there's an injury or whatever, and we're coming back, or even if we're looking ahead and we're starting to see a big difference in number of times they move towards the right or something like that, that might be indicative of something going on, or it might be indicative that they're not fully prepared to return all the way back to competition. So those are some of the things that we'll look at.
And what have you learned that's surprised you?
I think the relative balance, honestly, of at least with our goaltenders, of their crease movements.
Okay.
I would have expected that there would have been a lot more asymmetry in their in the crease patterns, and at least with our guys, it seems to be very, very symmetrical as far as the amount of work that's being produced, the amount of times they're moving in different directions. So that's been kind of interesting.
So what do you mean by asymmetry? Because to a person like me, you observe somebody doing crease movement drills. We're moving as many times left as we are right. Are you talking about the force they're generating, for example, or what's that all about?
In this case, the similarity in the number of times they are moving left and right. So basically, they're not, which I think is going to be a good thing, because you're going to have essentially equal wear and tear left to right, hips and groins and things like that. But it's one thing to have that similarity in patterning in a closed drill where we're just working on skating or in the crease movement. It's a whole nother thing to see what's happening in sort of a real-time scenario in practice, like in a game scenario. How often are they moving off of the left post to the top of the right crease versus the other way? And again, it's been interesting that it's been fairly symmetrical. It's been fairly the same, at least across the broad spectrum. There's certainly differences day to day, but when you look at the totality of their work, and I don't know if that's as much an indication of the team play around them or their own style and movement patterns themselves. So those are some of the things we've seen that we're thinking about.
Interesting. Are you able to quantify force at all? Because I think we've talked about a bit of a trend away from those goalies that, the push hard, stop hard, all that extra force with the internal rotation on the hip. And
Yeah.
what's going on there?
So not necessarily with the on the ice system. You can extrapolate force from some of the acceleration metrics, so we can see how fast somebody's accelerating or decelerating. But we also use force plates in the gym that specifically measures that, and we can look at left and right to see if an athlete is producing or absorbing more force left to right, which again is a big sort of baseline and return to play indicator for us, and as well as sort of a diagnostic. If we see an athlete is generally speaking is fairly symmetrical at camp as far as how they push left to right, and now all of a sudden we're seeing a 10 or a 15% difference on one leg or the other, then those are sort of red flags that we'll pay attention to and work with the medical staff to figure out what's going on.
Is there anything in this, or do you have enough experience using this system at a lower level to really distinguish the difference between the elite and the non-elite?
Not with the GPS type system. That again is relatively new in hockey. So when I came from the college setting, that wasn't a tool that we had available to us. From a force plate standpoint, certainly, and a lot of our sort of benchmarking and profiling of players, even within our organization, from New Jersey down to Binghamton, is identifying strengths and weaknesses and what some of those thresholds look like in a bunch of different metrics, in force output and speed and acceleration, power development. For goaltenders, for players, for everybody, is trying to develop some profiles around guys to kind of have an idea, okay, what does an NHL, what does an NHL goaltender who has played more than 5 seasons in the National Hockey League look like from a physical standpoint versus somebody who, maybe has not reached that level of distinction, but has played the same amount of time in the minor leagues? Like, are there physical differences between those guys outside of skill and talent and things like that?
And are there?
Yes and no. I think what I generally see amongst our NHL players who, again, have played for a longer amount of time, veteran players at all positions, is not necessarily greater peaks in a lot of these physical metrics. They're not necessarily much stronger than the American League players. They're not much faster than the American League players. What I think you do see is they are more consistent across the board. They're almost better generalists from a physical development standpoint than specialists, where you may see a player that's a bubble player that's up and down might be exceptionally fast if it's a forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
They might be faster than some of our 8-year veterans in the National Hockey League, but they also fatigue faster, or they're not able to repeat those things as much. So they're very specialized in that specific skill set or that specific physical quality, but they're not necessarily, they don't have the breadth of physical abilities.
Probably informing your opinions on youth sports, I would think.
Very much so. Absolutely. Yeah.
So tell us, what should a 10 or 15-year-old goaltender be doing right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are 14-ish and under, I think you should be playing multiple sports.
Mm-hmm.
I think early specialization is not good overall for athletic development. I think, especially for team sport athletes, I think maybe the equation is a little bit different if you're a figure skater or a gymnast, where if you're not elite at 12, you can't compete, right? But who's the greatest 14-year-old goaltender to ever play the game? Don't know.
We'll never
know. We'll never know, and it kind of doesn't matter. What matters is how good are you? How developed are you? How athletic are you? How robust are you from a injury preventative standpoint, which I think is one of the bigger aspects of the specialization conversation that gets missed. Is over specialization, early specialization creates a lot of the early injury mechanisms that we're seeing across sports, across positions, certainly with goaltenders, with FAI and all of the hip and groin issues. Having a broader base of athletic experience and abilities, and different movement patterns and different loading patterns and different speeds and change of directions and all of these different things early on creates a more robust physical person that's able to then at 15, at 16, at 17, when it is time to specialize and it is time to dedicate much more time to just playing goal, the body is more physically developed and capable and less worn down from the trauma of what we do, of playing goal. Let's be honest. It's the positions that we have to get into in the modern game are not, the human body's not really built for that, right? Exactly. No. It's not good for you.
Yeah.
So probably long-winded answer to a short question, but that's kind of in a nutshell what I think about early specialization.
Well, and I actually don't think it really is a short question, at least not expecting a short one, because one of the things that drives me crazy is when you see the latest Facebook post about this guy in the NHL played baseball, soccer, whatever, therefore all kids should. And of course, you can probably find a guy in the NHL who did nothing but hockey as well, and we're not posting that. So that's why my ears sort of perked up when you were starting to tie some data to these opinions. And when you mentioned that the NHL players versus the minor league players are more generalists. So have you got other sort of experience and data that, I mean, the injury thing you talked about where's that coming from beyond opinion? Because I know you're a science-based guy.
Which part?
Well, just tying the injury to early specialization versus being a generalist.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a big question. I know that there is research being done and has been done in a lot of other sports around this. Soccer is a huge one, especially in the UK. Baseball, I think people are at least somewhat familiar with, the Tommy John situation, and
Sure.
that's happening earlier and earlier and earlier with kids. There were studies, probably it might be 10 years ago now, but some of the early studies in hockey on FAI, femoral acetabular impingement, not specifically amongst goaltenders, but amongst what they considered elite players at, I believe, the Pee-wee age group, Bantam age group, and midget age group, over the course of 8 to 10 year study, essentially showed at each one of those age groups, they more or less doubled the percentage of athletes that had clinical signs of FAI. So they put people through MRIs, and they imaged them, and they found, at the Pee-wee age group of these, quote unquote elite players, they something like 33% of them had signs of FAI.
Wow.
At the Bantam age group, it went to 65 or 66%. Basically, by midget AAA age, 18 and under, it was like 99% of these players had signs of FAI, and these were players essentially that were, when they considered them elite, they were just playing hockey. They were AAA level players, etc. So from a data standpoint, what that tells me is that by the time we're seeing athletes, whether or not they're symptomatic, because you can have sort of internal structural mechanisms of these issues, but they're not showing dysfunction. They're not creating pain yet. We just need to assume that they all have something going on, especially if they've just been playing or primarily been playing hockey from an early age, just because of the wear and tear. And again, whether it's goaltending or skating, the hip joint is really not designed to do what we're asking it to do in our sport. So we need to understand that. We need to appreciate that and realize that by the time we're getting them at our level, the college and the professional level, major junior level, these athletes already have issues going on. And so we need to take that into account when we're training them and how we're approaching rehabilitation and training programs and all those things.
That's fascinating. So you're basically assuming a goaltender, I mean, I know a player as well, but we're not so worried about the skaters, is arriving as effectively damaged goods when he comes into your hands, regardless
they
of what
really
he's
are.
showing.
They really are. And again, it doesn't mean that 100% of them are showing outward signs. They're not necessarily having dysfunction or pain. And some again, there's going to be outliers. Some of these athletes their hips are built in certain ways that just allow them more room, right? And so there might not be an issue, but the reality is almost everybody that we're seeing at least has some underlying pathology. And so we need to take those things into account. And then we need to think about, and this is what we do a lot here with our players, is we think about, okay, it's not always about improving performance, but a lot of times it's about mitigating the damage that's being done. If we're skating, competing every single day at this level, there's wear and tear that's happening. What can we do on the other side of the coin to try to offset some of that? And that's what a lot of our training programs with our goaltenders are really built around, is how can we manage the dysfunction that it might be sort of underlying to keep these guys competing and playing at a high level and as close to the razor's edge as possible.
So how can we? Can you give me an example of what that means for a goaltender at the NHL level? And for all the panicky parents of, not even panicky, let's face it, we're all just reasonably concerned, of the 6-year-old, the 10-year-old, whatever your age, what can we be doing so that they're arriving healthier when they all realize their dream?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing, and it's honestly, it's a pretty simple answer, but the first component is, especially for the younger athletes, is quality off ice training, quality off ice strength and conditioning, not super specialized. Not, I think people get sport specific caught up in their mind a lot of time with training and think that, well, if my child's a goaltender, if I'm a goaltender, then what we should be doing in the gym or off the ice should look like goaltending. And that's actually kind of the opposite. The specificity is happening on the ice every day.
Mm-hmm.
What we want to be doing is training what I call human specific, the way the human body is supposed to kind of move, and just in general get stronger. A stronger athlete, and I, in quotes, because what does that really mean? But a stronger athlete is going to be more robust and be able to handle more stress. So younger athletes, I would highly encourage being involved in a sound strength and conditioning sports performance type program, not specifically aimed necessarily at goaltenders, but just aimed at general strength and conditioning. That's certainly an underlying component for our guys here, but they're generally more developed and kind of have that foundation under them. So a lot of what we're doing, the recipe is really kind of the same every day. We address soft tissue quality. So what does that mean? That means every day our goaltenders are coming into the weight room and starting their day with a foam roller, or they're working with our massage therapist. And you can kind of think of massage or foam rolling as trying to improve the quality of the muscle tissue. So if you've got a bunch of knots in there, you're trying to relax those knots out. That's the first thing we do. Then we're doing some very standard vanilla static stretching. We're trying to lengthen the tissue out to get it to kind of an optimal range. So obviously everybody's familiar with basic stretching. So we go foam roll, we go stretch. Then we want to address joint mobility.
How much time are you spending on that?
As long as we're consistent doing it every day, roll and stretch might be 10 minutes, maybe even less.
So this isn't the obsessive NHL goaltender doing 2 hours of stretching.
No,
and we do know
really
of
not.
some.
It's not with our guys at least, and all of them will have their own specific little tweaks and routines that they want to go through. But we're really not spending a tremendous amount of time, trying to just hang out in the splits. We're trying to just basically get some length through the tissue, improve the quality of the tissue. Then we're going into joint mobility. So the ankle, the hip, and the thoracic spine, the upper back, are designed to be very mobile in the human body. When they are not, you end up with compensations and issues certain places. Again, NHL goaltenders being the elite of the elite, they tend to be very, very mobile. Most NHL goaltenders are what we would call hypermobile. Mm-hmm. So we'll spend some time on mobility work, but it's not a major piece of the puzzle because they're usually very good at it. The next piece, though, is that we address is something called functional range conditioning, or FRC. Okay. And it's essentially getting into end range positions. So going back into stretches, but creating tension and strength at those end ranges. Because a lot of where you see injuries occur for a goaltender is, when they're extended into the splits or they have to reach back and obviously get into a unique position. It's at that end range where the muscles and the joints are at their weakest. So we're trying to create some tension and strength at those end ranges. And again, this is on a daily basis. This is maybe another 5 minutes worth of work, but it's a consistent recipe that we're applying.
Can you give me an example of what one of those looks like? Because I actually have a goaltender who was told no more stretching because he's so crazy hypermobile.
Yeah.
But was too young to have the strength at the end range.
Yeah. So for that individual, you could picture sitting on the floor doing a V sit, or kind of extending the legs out, getting as far into a split, so to speak, as you could. At each ankle, you might have a heavy kettlebell, or you could picture doing it like in a door frame. Mm-hmm. So you're able to sort of push once you've gotten to your end range. You're just physically pushing into the door frame or into the kettlebells to create tension. It's like an isometric hold. So you're not actually moving, but you're pushing in.
Right.
You hold that for 3 to 5 seconds, and then you pull back out. And so literally what you're doing is just creating tension in and out at your end ranges. Which
if I remember, also gives you a little bit more range, the old PNF stretching.
It's very, very similar to PNF stretching. Yeah, exactly. Very conceptually, it's very similar.
Okay. So sorry, I interrupted you there as you were going through the what you're doing.
I mean, again, on a daily basis, we're at the 15-minute mark roughly. And then we're gonna get up and go through some just very basic kind of dynamic flexibility, dynamic warm up exercises, and then we're basically gonna finish off with some low volume strength and power work. So we have a piece of equipment in our gym called the 1080 Quantum that allows us to do lateral based strength training at really high intensities, but without any load on the body. So basically we can do like a lateral push, creating a lot of force. So it's almost like a shuffle motion in the crease, but they're able to load it, or we're able to set the machine to load it to create high levels of force at very low speeds. So you would think of like, it's akin to doing a very heavy squat, like a 1 rep max squat, where you're not moving very fast, but you're pushing as hard as you can. But we're able to do that laterally, or even some rotational components. We can get into like a reverse BH position and create movement out of these positions. The system governs them so they can't move very fast, but they can push really hard. So we're developing strength through a specific range. And then we'll couple that with some lateral based plyometrics or medicine ball throws. So we're kind of going strength to speed. We might do 2 to 3 sets of each of those. And that's 20 minutes pre-practice. And then they're going to get dressed and get on the ice.
Same thing every day ish.
Same recipe.
Yeah.
We'll, alter the specific exercise or the specific pattern, but the recipe basically stays the same.
Okay. So how does that inform then a youth goaltender or even a early junior goaltender? What should they be doing every day?
I think the recipe again stays the same. Address soft tissue, address length, address tension at length, because that's very specific for us as goaltenders. Some basic dynamic warm up to physically just warm the body up is very important from an injury preventative standpoint, but also you can think of dynamic warm up, skipping and shuffles and lateral stops and starts as like specific skill work. So it's kind of working on the patterns, the basic stuff, just like most goaltenders know when they get out on the ice at practice. Most guys are going to have a skating routine, some crease work. It's the same idea. It's just repetitive, basic movement patterns that are also just physically warming them up. And then if you have access to any way that you can do just very, very brief, obviously you're not going to have the 1080 Quantum at most, town rinks, but some very basic, single leg squats to a bench, with some lateral bounds. And if you've got a medicine ball that you can throw, some rotational medicine ball throws. I think from a 2-pronged approach, one, that's priming the nervous system to go out on the ice and do explosive work. But 2, it's what we consider a microdosing approach. If you're able to do 1 or 2 just mini exercises every day before practice, that adds up over the course of a season to quite a robust training floor. And that's really an approach that we take here with the NHL schedule being as hectic as it is. The amount of time that we can actually dedicate to training in the gym is very minimal. So we try to microdose. We get just 1 or 2 little things done just about every single day or every practice day, instead of spending an hour and a half, in the gym twice a week, which you don't have the availability to.
Which is a good lesson, I think, for everybody. Don't become overwhelmed and expect that you have to get everything dialed in and perfect. Just get something done.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So
a little bit consistently. Yep.
So every training kit needs a foam roller.
100%. I would say if you're not foam rolling prior to practice and games, really any kind of physical activity for goaltending, I think you're missing a huge piece of the puzzle from an injury mechanism standpoint. I think that clears a lot of problems out right there, just being consistent with your tissue quality. So I think that's the first thing to definitely have in your bag.
Wow, so many threads to pull here still. This is great. I'm still fascinated by the conversation about about the physical testing and how that ties to performance. Always been fascinated to look at the combine process, whether it's at the NHL or junior, and we've even got junior leagues now combine testing, quote in air quotes, kids as young as 12 years old now.
Yeah.
Does that really inform where somebody's going?
At that age, I would
Yeah.
say not really.
Yeah.
The only general takeaways from any type of combine testing, in my opinion, are really the speed and power based metrics. If you've got two 12-year-olds and you do, at a combine and you do a vertical jump,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't even know what a good 12-year-old vertical jump would be, but let's say 20 inches is exceptional at that age. And you've got somebody that jumps 20 inches and you've got somebody that jumps 10 inches.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's going to tell you necessarily where they're going to be in 8 years. What it would tell you is then, at least innately, those two athletes have some different physical qualities. Vertical jump is going to be very indicative of explosiveness
Mm-hmm.
in any direction. So vertical jump is going to correlate to some degree with, crease movements and explosive movements. It's also going to correlate to skating speed for players. So if you've got somebody at that age that has a poor vertical jump, or one that has a very good vertical jump, you say, okay, you've got sort of two levels of athleticism. You probably have enough time to impact it, thankfully, especially if you don't, have that explosiveness innately. But it's not going to tell you, it's not going to predict down the road what type of player this is going to be or how good they're going to be. Even at this level, at the NHL combine, I think looking at those explosive type metrics can inform a little bit about where a player's at, but even then it's going to be very different contextually. If you've got a player that has a big training age, they've been in a gym and trained well and trained explosively for a long time, they might score very well in those tests, but they may be near their ceiling. Whereas if you have an athlete that's never walked into a gym, their numbers might not be that great, but you don't know that their ceiling might be much higher. So all of those types of metrics, none of them are definitive. They all have to be taken in context and, quite frankly, with a grain of salt.
Mm-hmm. Really important thing that you just brought up about finding the ceiling, because scouting, of course, is about far more than deciding who the best player on the ice is today, but where can we take him as a pro? Anything you can inform a scouting staff about?
Well, I think, again, from those physical characteristics, I can't necessarily, certainly not to the degree of any of our scouts, I can't tell you who the best players are.
Sure.
But I can tell you, again, just from the quick snapshot from combine data, if somebody is jumping through the roof, and their wind gate power output is really high, any metrics that we can see that show explosiveness, I'm going to say, okay, that player is probably pretty fast. And if they're not very fast, it's probably a skating skill component that can be fixable. If somebody's really, really poor at those things, again, if I don't know what their training background is, I can't really tell you if they're going to get better or not, but I can tell you, at least today, take the guy, if their skills are the same, take the guy that jumps higher, because if he's in net, he's more explosive and probably more athletic. If he's a forward, his first three strides are going to be faster and more explosive than the other guy. Those are the things. So from a scouting standpoint, those are the types of conversations we have that, hey, I'm not going to sit here and tell you who a better hockey player is, but at least as we sit today, I can tell you this person is probably more athletic. So if all things are equal, then I would push you in that direction.
Has the athletic ability at the elite level in the last 20 years, of course it's changed, but I often wonder whether we're becoming a little bit more homogenous. I mean, I think there was a time 15, 20 years ago, you could be an elite NHL goaltender, but maybe not be the same athlete that your teammate is. Probably less so today. Is that fair? That you
I
really
would
can't
agree.
get away. Yeah.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think for the most part, I think it has to do with much better training today than we had, physical training than we had 15 years ago. and more widespread. I think, people understand, again, in net, we understand all things being equal. You've got two goaltenders of the same talent level, and one is just more innately athletic. Then that player's ceiling may be higher. Well, players understand this now and understand that you can develop athleticism, and that's really what gym training should be about, is developing athleticism. So it's become more and more important, and people understand that. And goaltenders now, again, from an early age, I think you're right. I think goaltenders in today's NHL are just as athletic, if not more so, than a lot of their teammates, where that probably wasn't the case as often 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, and that's not to say there weren't great athletes then. I think it was J.S. Jaguar who said that he thinks that of all the siblings in his family, he was probably the worst athlete of all of them, and yet, one of the best goaltenders. Just that the game is different.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah,
no question.
I think in a way you've touched on this a little bit, but I did come in this wanting to ask you, based on the data, based on the tracking systems you're using in practice and so on, how are goaltenders different from the other athletes on the ice? And as a result, how are you training them differently?
So there's a couple things. One, from a conditioning or an energy system development standpoint, and a lot of this is going to be common sense, but the physical demands from a conditioning standpoint are different for goaltenders and for players. Essentially, what you see from a heart rate standpoint with goaltenders is less of a valley. So their heart rate is always consistently higher than most of the rest of the players. If you look at average heart rate over time.
Oh, so we're working harder than the players.
We are working harder than players. There's no question about it.
Thank you.
We actually are from a physical output standpoint. So heart rate is the average heart rate, let's say over the course of the game, is going to be higher than players. And that's because literally, obviously, we're not going to sit down on the bench. So we're staying more elevated throughout the entire game than players who are going to have more highs and lows. So we have less up and down in net, but we have a higher average over time. So that's one thing. And then the way that translates from a training standpoint is in our off-season training program, certainly it'll be reflective of how we perform conditioning work to train them more to be able to do that, to have a somewhat higher but sustained heart rate than players who are more kind of repeat sprint athletes. But in practice, it's something that we talk about and we think about as in terms of how we structure practice or how we structure our goaltenders' time in net based on the physical demands. So basically what you see in practice, just historically in hockey practice, what the goaltenders are asked to do during a normal practice is not indicative of what happens in a game. So if you want to train a goaltender optimally in practice to perform in a game, then you need to think about how many shots they stay in net for, how much recovery and break time they get, and do you have them just stand in net and take 45 shots in a row as whatever
flow drill
flow drills are flying around? Because when you kind of look under the cover and look at the heart rate response to what's going on, you're absolutely redlining your goaltender. You're certainly not developing any specific skill set because we're not actually playing the position the way we play in a game. You're just standing there trying to react and not get hit in the face. And so physiologically, it's very different. So we have these conversations all the time about, sometimes that's necessary and sometimes that's just what it is. But when and where we can alter that, we try to make adjustments on the ice. From sort of a strength power standpoint, obviously the game in net is very laterally based, and it's actually in some ways it's more explosive than players as far as what we're being asked to do is perform one extremely high intensity, high speed, high velocity movement or acceleration with a hard deceleration and a quick reaction, and then a reset and a movement, whereas players are obviously more kind of moving around and flowing all the time. So from a training standpoint, goaltenders actually in the weight room actually need to focus even more on kind of power and speed based work as opposed to more higher repetition kind of general strength work.
So Devan McConnell gets to start running all the New Jersey Devil practices tomorrow, and let's forget the needs of the players, because obviously we have to make concessions so that they can train as well. But let's just say we didn't care what the players were doing. How would you change a practice? Would it specifically be in how you're practicing, or would you have 4 goaltenders out there so that you can alter heart rates? I mean, what would you do in an ideal world?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, and you throw all the rules out the window, I'd have 4 goaltenders out there, and you'd basically have you'd have 2 sort of practice dummy guys that would end up taking the bulk of the work in those non-specific flow drill type exchanges, and you have your top 2 guys basically subbing in and out in more realistic sort of time frames. So you might have MacKenzie Blackwood in the net during, again, whatever flow drill for a period of 30 seconds, or maybe it's a shot count of 5 or 6 shots, and then you'd pull them out and you'd have 1 to 2 minutes of rest, or maybe go into the corner with the goalie coach and do some low intensity kind of more specific skill work or skating work, come back in, much more like the flow of a game where maybe the puck is in your end for 15, 20 seconds, 1 shot, 2 shots and a rebound, whatever it might be, and then get out while the puck goes the other end. So that's probably the main thing that I would do, is bring in or set up a scenario where our top 2 goaltenders, our guys, wouldn't be drilled with 30 shots in a row for 4 minutes straight, but that their workflow and their work to rest ratios would be much more game-like, especially in those types of drills that are not game specific, but are necessary from a sort of skill development standpoint for the rest of the group.
That's fascinating on a couple of levels, because one, we often hear at the NHL level the phrase 3 doesn't go into 2, and it becomes almost untenable to have 3 guys on the roster at once, and yet you're giving us a really good reason to do that, if not 4. But I've also never heard anybody put it the way you just did, where it's not just a guy to share a net, but for some very specific reasons at times. So the practice dummy, might be getting, I'm going to read into this, 80% of a flow drill, and the starter might be getting 80% of a game like drill.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, that's from a physiological perspective. I understand the
100%.
psychological side of it and all the other elements. And it's when I worked in the college setting, we did this. In college hockey in the US and the NCAA, you can have 4 goalies on a roster, and it's not totally uncommon at the college level. And for a few years, we kind of experimented with that, and it worked to some degree from a physiological perspective, but it was a challenge from the other side of the coin. So it's a give and take, and it's a conversation. I don't think there's an exact science to it, but I know, looking at the data, that the way we traditionally practice our goaltenders, or what their data tells us from practice, is not reflective of what happens in a game. So at some point, specificity is really important. And if practice is just becoming a overly fatiguing workload standpoint for goaltenders that does not train them physically for what they have to do in games, and I think we need to think about what's the optimal way to develop goaltenders from a practice standpoint.
And let's be clear here. The New Jersey Devil Sport Science staff is not telling all parents of young goaltenders to run to the head coach and say, you need to change what you're doing. This isn't right. There's a lot of reasons for doing things.
Yes.
And,
please don't get me in trouble.
No,
I like my job.
not a good strategy for parents. This is just something maybe for coaches to think about and learn from. Physiologically, then, there's also some rationale to something else that often we talk about, and that's in those flow drills, how often a player will take a shot and just sort of peel to the corner, and it ends up, as you say, shot after shot. not really good for players either. But this would sort of suggest we should inform our drills with not just that shot, but shot and a rebound, because
Yeah. Well,
you
and
know,
that's a huge thing, right? Like even if there's no rebound, like we're trained as goaltenders and we understand the importance of tracking the puck and where does the puck go and moving to where that puck goes after the save, after the initial save. Even if that player peels off and doesn't get the rebound, we should follow the puck to the corner, you know. But if you've got the flow drill where the next shot's coming 7 seconds later, you're not able to do that. So in my opinion, that creates bad habits because goaltender is now not able to follow the play and follow the puck the way that we're supposed to, the way that we know we need to, from a goaltender development skill standpoint. And so that again creates sort of a dysfunctional pattern as far as how practice often operates versus what is optimal for a goaltender.
But you're talking about habits and technical, but there probably is physiologically a reason too, because you want them to have that explosive component.
100%.
And so you also got to hold your goalies honest in that. Don't just follow the puck, but let's give them a reason to.
Right. And so again, if we take that concept or that drill and we think about it from a physical development standpoint, where you're right, we want to be training and developing explosiveness with our athlete. Well, if the goaltender is at the end of a 4-minute segment and they're 40 the shot,
There's no explosion.
You cannot do that. You can't become fast and explosive and powerful in the presence of fatigue. So it goes back to that idea of having, you know, another goaltender out there to take shots. From a physical development standpoint, what that allows the number one guy or number two guy to do is to train to be explosive, because then if you're only taking 5 to 6 shots, you can be sharp, you can be explosive, you can be technical and not be fatigued. The idea is to be explosive and then get out of the way before fatigue sets in. That's what you're really trying to do, because very rarely in a game setting are we going to be spending an amount of time taking shots, or, you know, even in the crease with the puck in our zone for longer than, I mean, you know, there's outlier opportunities, but 30 seconds at a time.
5-on-3 maybe though.
Exactly.
Do you train for that ever, or does it just sort of come from the regular training? Because that is being explosive under exhaustion.
Yeah.
Potentially.
So if you're gonna theoretically, you know, develop that, what you want to do, what I would want to do from a practice standpoint, early in practice, you want to develop and train the qualities to be fast and explosive and powerful. So that's your 10 seconds of work, minute of rest, you know, 3 shots, 5 shots, minute of rest. You can be explosive, get out before you're fatigued, because you're actually trying to train to be faster and be sharper. You can take that same type of drill and then you can do it at the end of practice, and you can extend the time frame. So instead of 5 seconds, now it is 30 seconds or a minute. Instead of 5 shots, now it is 15 or 20 shots. So what you're trying to do at that point is maintain as high a percentage of your explosiveness that you developed early on at the end. An example I always like to use is basketball coaches. Basketball coaches love to run their players into the ground and then have them go to the free throw line and hit buckets, because at the end of the game,
opposite.
Right, at the end of the game, you're going to be tired. You got to be able to hit a free throw. Totally agree. But if at the start of the game you're only shooting 20% from the line, who cares if you're maintaining 20% at the end?
Yeah.
You want to develop the quality first and then maintain the quality later, but you can't do them the other way around.
Yeah, fascinating. That's really fascinating. Just back to the training piece again, and you were talking about the aerobic component for goaltenders being different than players. There seems to be a bit of a sort of two different things going on there. You want them to be the most explosive athlete on the team, and yet they've got to maintain a higher heart rate for a longer period of time. So those are two different things, I believe. How do you handle that with training? And what does the aerobic training look like for a goaltender versus a player?
Yeah, so goalies are what I consider an alactic aerobic athlete, which is exactly what you just said. It's alactic is being explosive. That's 10 seconds or less of really high intensity, high speed, explosive, powerful work. And then aerobic is being able to maintain a kind of a lower percentage for a longer amount of time. We want to stay out of the middle ground. So most players are more of a middle ground. They're an anaerobic athlete. They're not always as explosive, but they don't need as big an aerobic sort of foundation. They live more in the middle. Goalies, we want to be very explosive at the top, and then recovery and aerobic ability down at the bottom. So what does that look like from a training standpoint? That looks like in the gym doing mostly explosive based power development work, plyometrics, med ball throws, explosive loaded jumping exercises, things like that. Not a ton of exercise in the 8 to 12 rep range. That's kind of the middle. And then from a conditioning standpoint, it's working a little bit more on the length end of the spectrum when we do like interval work on the bike. Whereas a player, we might be doing a 30-second sprint with a minute rest. The goaltender, we might be doing a minute or 2-minute work interval with a 1-minute rest. So it's still interval based. It's not steady state, your old school kind of road work, go run for 45 minutes or bike for 45 minutes. It's a higher intensity interval than that, but it's somewhat longer than what we might have our forwards and defensemen doing.
Is there a place for the 6K run you send a kid out on?
No.
Or is that loaded? No, that's a loaded question.
Is there a place for longer duration steady state work? I would say for a high level, well-developed athlete, yes, early in the off season. I would not have that be running, because most hockey players, regardless of position, are poor runners, and there's going to be an orthopedic cost to longer running relative to something that's less impactful, like a bike. So there's
because we're so refined to be hockey players, now our bodies just aren't ready for the demands of running.
Essentially, I think for most team sport athletes that aren't aerobic based, soccer might be kind of an example of somebody that would be. Most of us are not well built. Part of what makes us good for hockey and for goaltending physically and the way we're built is what makes us not good for like longer distance running. Sprinting is a different equation. I think sprinting is really good for goaltenders and for all athletes, but longer duration stuff, not so much. And I would say that the window of time that's necessary or beneficial is pretty minimal in the course of a year. Post-season, 3 to 4 weeks, 2, maybe 3 times a week is really all that's necessary before we start to train those other qualities. Because at the end of the day, that steady state aerobic work, that VO2 work that used to be so important, we now realize doesn't matter a little bit, but it's priority number 6 on the list. So if you're not getting 1 through 5 done, you're not becoming more explosive and stronger and faster, then don't worry about number 6 on the list. That doesn't matter. It's not going to have as big an impact on your game.
And speaking of impact, there's a cost to that work as well if you're not ready
for
it.
That work.
Yeah. How about recovery? I think, whether it's the NHL where you have these wild schedules that are so hard to work with, or a youth team playing 5 games in a weekend, how do you manage recovery? Those are 2 different extremes probably, but
yeah, but you're right. It's very challenging. And it's a huge component, and it's one of the components of training and development that I think probably gets overlooked a lot. I think when it comes to recovery at any level, I think the basics are the most important. Sleep is absolutely number 1. You can't out recover poor sleep. So getting proper sleep, as much sleep as you can, deep sleep, that's a challenge in the NHL with the schedule. But that's component number 1. So educating guys on sleep hygiene and helping them find ways to get to sleep post game and things like that is really important. Nutrition and hydration, really important. Post game, for us, post game nutrition is an absolutely key component. Like what our guys are eating post game and recovery shakes afterwards. And again, there's no magic bullet, but just sound, high quality food is number two. From a sort of mechanical standpoint, it's almost the same recipe in reverse from the warm up. We want to address joint mobility, and then soft tissue length, so stretching, and then foam rolling to improve the quality. You just think about what we do in net all game. Muscles get tight and bound up and twisted and kind of beat up. We want to basically afterwards, after practice or a game, get on a foam roller, lengthen that tissue out, sort of get back to baseline, get back to neutral, as we like to say. Those are the tenets, the big things, the big rocks. And again, whether you're playing 5 games in a weekend as a youth player, it's kind of the same thing. If you got a foam roller in your bag, get your gear off, spend 3 or 4 minutes on foam roller, and just work through anything that's sore or tight or stiff. It'll pay dividends, not necessarily in game 2, but in game 5, it'll add up. Hydration and nutrition, same thing. Only a small amount of dehydration, a 2% loss in water weight basically can be a 20 or 30% decrease in power output and aerobic ability and even cognitive ability. So that's not much. Players will routinely lose 10 pounds of sweat in an NHL game. So getting hydrated post game is really, really important to get back to baseline.
There's some solid research that's informed practice in fairly recent years. My son couldn't believe it the other day when I told him back when I played hockey and minor hockey, we were forced to spit out any water that we drank on the bench.
Yeah.
Things have changed. Okay, too. You've probably heard my partner on the podcast, Kevin Woodley, many times say, "I'm sorry I've kept you so long. Didn't mean it to be this long." But just one more question, if I can throw it in.
Yeah.
People are, and I hope you'll come back at another time because I could talk about this forever. Thank you for this time. I don't know that I got into hips enough with you. You certainly mentioned them. I was fascinated when you mentioned that people arrive at the pro level, almost all of them, with some damage. What should we be doing about our hips with our young goaltenders? And I assume you're going to tell me about the end of range motion strengthening and the foam rollers and stuff. But is there anything else we should be doing as coaches, as parents, so that our kids are arriving to you in better health?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the things that I talked about, I think general, well-designed strength training and all of those pieces of the recipe are really important. You're going to be able to handle higher levels of stress. You're going to be able to handle more volume of that stress if you're just physically more robust and stronger. So yes, those basics are really, really important. I think the anti-specialization, especially early on, is an important component to that. It doesn't mean don't go to goalie school once a week, in the summers.
Mm-hmm.
It just means like maybe, pick up a lacrosse stick or kick a soccer ball too, and do some other things. Because I think that's going to improve not only performance, but I think that's going to improve robustness again. I think on the ice, I know there's been a lot of talk about, some of the studies that have come out that have shown that some of the highest levels of force and torque in the hip is during hard stops in skating type drills. It's a balancing act, right? Because that's performance and that's training for performance. Those are skills we need and we want to develop. I would say keeping those things in mind and minimizing the volume of that. I think a lot of what we do in sport in general as coaches in any regard is we add more on top of the pile. It's let's do a little more. Let's do one more rep or one more set or one more of this or a little bit longer. And the reality is the bang for your buck from a performance standpoint isn't more volume, it's more intensity. So it's doing less of those, but making them kind of like our practice example, making them sharper and crisper and then recovering from it. So instead of, this is a dumb example, but instead of doing, a hard stop drill from pre-practice from, across the blue line all the way across the ice, maybe we do, 4 hard stops aside and we go from the boards to the face-off dot or whatever that is, or whatever you would do in the crease instead of doing 5 rotations, around a star drill, maybe we only do 2, or maybe we do 2 and we take a break and we get multiple sets of it. So it's more about sharp and intense than kind of long and fatiguing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, which is almost the opposite of what so many parents want. I mean, you send your kid to goalie school. I want 1 kid in the net, and let's have more reps because I'm paying a lot of money for this.
And
And
it's actually not. It's counterintuitive. It's counter to development.
yes,
Like that is not how you develop the athlete. That's how you get a lot of work done. And you make them tired, and you get work for work's sake. But work for work's sake isn't the same thing as deliberate practice.
exactly. And some people might even say, yeah, but then he gets more technical time. But again, as you said with the basketball example, that's not quality technical time either, is it?
Right.
Yeah. Devan, we could talk all day. I really enjoyed that. I'm sure you don't have all day, so I apologize for taking so much time, and I thank you on behalf of all of our listeners for sharing some time with us today.
Well, this was a blast. I could talk all day, and I would love to come back if you guys would have me.
Absolutely.
This was a lot of fun. I don't get to talk goalie nearly enough, so I had a blast. Thank you.
All right, Devan. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Great way to wrap it up. That was fun. Good job, Hutch. And foam rolling, we know Woody's all happy. He's pumped because we got some foam rolling.
Darren,
Yes.
he knows the time code from when that was made.
Oh, we're pulling that clip, baby. That thing is going to be all over the internet. If you're not foam rolling, you're missing a huge part of the puzzle. Believe me, boys, I noted that one. I got to say, like, in addition, I make jokes about foam rolling. Obviously, we know I'm a little obsessive with it, despite the fact I don't actually find time to do it and can barely get out of my chair when we finish talking here. But in addition to that, I got to say the coolest part of this interview, and there were a ton of cool parts, is the fact that we found Devan, that we connected with Devan. I should say that Hutch connected with Devan because he subscribed to InGoal Premium.
It's perfect.
It really is. We talked about it earlier with Brandon Maxwell coming on board as a subscriber, as a pro, all the pros we have. Not trying to make it a flex or a back pat, but it's
a community,
it's
though,
a
right?
sign we're growing this community in the right direction when we have 12-year-old kids who just want to have a FaceTime session with Cory Price, to seasoned veterans and pros and NHL, strength coaches, and actually not a strength coach, more than that. But it's just, I mean, it made me feel really good that this interview comes from him subscribing to our magazine, that people see that value. And it's because people like him are willing to then give us their time so we can find more content and more ideas and have more conversations about the position that we can then store. I mean, I can think of 3 or 4 different story ideas that popped into my head listening to him talk, different angles that I think you could dive into and explore with different people, from practice philosophies to, we hear a lot of butterfly count stuff. Well, now we're hearing and talk of studies of, even just the hard push, hard stop can do some damage. Like there's so much there.
Off ice, goalie specific stuff, maybe should be a little bit more just general strength training.
And if I could repeat, if you're not foam rolling, you're missing a huge part of the puzzle. There's just, and to have it come organically like that is, I mean, it just, I don't know. People can hear me, not see me, but hopefully they can hear the massive smile I have on my face, because it really means that this community that Hutch started, that we've grown for the podcast to now InGoal Premium, it really just feels like we got something special going in here, and having Devan be a part of it only increases that. So yeah, big smiles, not just because I'm sleep deprived today, boys. Big smiles all around.
And if you like what you hear from Devan, want more from him, I don't know whether he even knows we're doing this, but he's put out this book called Intent, a practical approach to applied sports science for athletic development. And you can pick that one up Amazon. It's an awesome read with a lot of sports science, and you get that intersection between what we have with our bodies and the science around it. And when they intersect, we learn so much more.
And there will be a link on the website with the show notes, but worth saying that, Devan didn't even mention the book. He didn't ask us to promo the book. He was just coming on to help out other goaltenders. And as I was just doing a little bit of Googling to learn a bit more about him before we chatted, I discovered the book, and I forgot to ask about it in the interview. Again, he didn't say a thing. So our pleasure to be able to share that with the audience. And I'm looking forward to digging deep into that book myself.
Hey, you know what book I'm reading right
What's that?
now? The Real Ogie, the story of Goldie Goldthorpe.
Oh, wow.
Is that
That's a long way from a practical approach to applied sports science for athletic development. Liam McGuire does the Real
Oh,
Ogie
mine-
book. There's a lot of stories.
I
in
am
there.
reading a book that came up on the Pete Fry webinar. When we had
wow.
when we had the Pete Fry webinar, he mentioned David Goggins, Can't Hurt Me. And interestingly, as he mentioned that, our other guest, Dylan Ferguson, ran to his bookshelf and pulled that off the bookshelf, and he'd been reading the same book. And
Show off.
well, I'm only going to mention it actually to say I'm not sure, especially if you're a parent of a younger goaltender, that you want to run and grab this book, because there's some pretty heavy stories from Goggins' childhood that are pretty difficult to read, and the language is very raw that you might expect out of Navy SEAL training. So, word of caution to parents, although I'm really enjoying the book.
So a lot of literary advice along
Woody,
with
can you read?
weekend planning.
Can Woody read?
I'm actually reading a book right now. We're having family reading time every night before we go to bed. We're trying to cut back on the television. There's a lot of family time as we're all locked.
Are there any
home
words
here.
in your book, Woody?
Where do you sneak in your crayons? What do you smuggle them in with?
Well, okay. I mean, normally family reading time would mean I would read Garfield to the youngest, but we've evolved a little bit here. I am reading The Game. I should say
right on.
it's been years since I've read it.
Yeah. I just finished it again.
I know, because you had it for the Vegas Golden Knights book club.
Yes.
And I got to say, like this is, I mean, I shouldn't be ashamed of it, but it is embarrassing. I want to say, because my kids are just blown away, this will be the first book I've read in probably a decade. And as a writer, that should be embarrassing. But the reality is I read so much, like I'm constantly reading stories and articles every day, deep dive features, profiles, things like that. Like I read so much journalism over the years that I stopped reading books. Like it's a really bad habit. And so to get back into it and to have it be Ken Dryden and The Game has been, it's been fun. I've enjoyed it. I'm powering through. I'm actually going to finish this thing.
Yeah, it's a book about his last season in the National Hockey League, put out the early 80s. So a really good read. There's been numerous anniversary editions, and it's just, it strikes me how the game's changed, but it hasn't changed a whole lot. Like the stories are pretty similar to the same stories you get now. So it really does give you a look inside a professional sports dressing room, a National Hockey League dressing room for that matter. Thanks to Devan McConnell, and looking forward to Paul Schoenfelder and Andy Chiodo this weekend on the webinar on Saturday, InGoalMag.com for more information on that. For David Hutchison and that voracious reader himself, Kevin Woodley, I'm Darren Millard. Thanks for listening to In Goal Radio, the podcast. We'll chat with you again.